Gladys. I'm the Secretary for International Relations for the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance, led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa. Today I'm going to be chairing this press conference. With me here I have our Deputy Secretary General, David Anthony Chimini. We also have our Deputy President, Honorable Tendai Biti, who is going to be addressing this particular press conference. Our press conference today is going to be on the just ended official visit of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights. So what we are going to do, our Vice President is going to address you, then after that we can take questions. Over to you, Vice President.
Thank you very much. Beg indulgence in moving some of your toys. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are very indebted, as usual, that you have blessed us with your presence here to deal with our response, official response to the report by the UN Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of coercive measures, Ms. Alena Douhan, who has been in Zimbabwe between the 17th of October and the 27th of October, and who presented a final report yesterday. We have procedural issues and procedural concerns. We have substantive concerns that we have, and I will raise the same. So on procedural issues, I want to place it on record that as a party, we have written a formal letter of complaint to New York, to the UN, about the conduct of Ms. Douhan, omissions and commissions, and we hope that the UN will formally carry out an investigation to validate our complaints, and we hope that they will acknowledge our complaints. We believe that we're an important stakeholder in this country. We are the biggest political party in this country. Our president polled over 2.6 million votes in 2018, and therefore we have a legitimate local standard, a legitimate footing in raising a complaint on behalf of the people of Zimbabwe that we represent both at home and abroad. The first complaint we have related to the bias in the consultations by the UN Special Rapporteur. If you look at a program which is public, it was dominated by public authorities. So it is as if she came with a mindset of doing a one-sided subjective consultation with the government and with government officials. The reference to consultations with political parties, the reference with consultation to us in particular in our respective view was just lipstick, cursory and indifferent. And I want to make reference in particular to our own consultation. We saw here on Wednesday, the 27th of October 2021, at 3 p.m. Our meeting lasted for 2 hours, from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. So we find it absolutely amusing, if not ridiculous, that we were the last group of persons that she saw. We found it ridiculous and amusing that we were nothing but a footnote in a process of consultation and engagement. What also amused us further is that immediately after we had left that meeting, which was held at Block 10, the UN head office in Mount Pleasant, we collided with the publication of the interim statement that was released on Wednesday, the 27th of October 2021. Yet in our meeting with her, she had actually asked for more documents from us, and she had given us assurances that whatever representations which we were making will be taken on board in the presentation of a press statement the following day, namely the 28th of October 2021. So in our view, a statement was prepaid and pre-manufactured. And I actually believe that she actually wrote that statement before she came here. And when you look at a 12-page report presented yesterday, you actually will be shocked and disappointed that in the main it represents a cut and paste job from her previous reports in Venezuela, Mr. Maduro's Venezuela, and in Syria. And in fact, there are passages where she just plucks from a Venezuelan report and indigenize by replacing Zimbabwe with Venezuela. That is completely shocking for the UN. That is completely dishonest. That is completely unprofessional, and it is completely unacceptable. I also want to report on our interface with it. I led the delegation that comprised of our Secretary General, Mr. Charlton Wende, our Secretary for International Affairs, Ms. Klachuayo, who is on my left, and our Secretary for Social Affairs, Ms. Morini Kademaunga. In the past, collectively, we have received hundreds of diplomatic delegations in Zimbabwe. We have met hundreds of missions in Zimbabwe. To mention a few years ago, we entertained Ms. Tubaijuka. We've entertained so many people, including the UN Secretary General himself. We were so disappointed by the presence of a very toxic, adversarial environment in that meeting. Normally, these meetings tend to be inquisitorial. The visiting delegates politely ask you questions. We want to hear you on this, we want to hear you on this, we want to hear you on this. We found a very defensive Miss Alena Douhan. We find a very obstructive Miss Alena Douhan. And at some stage it was like you were in a court of law, a very ugly atmosphere. Particularly when we pointed out some iniquities, some of which I'll point out below. One of the debates we had with her was her insistence that her mandate was a narrow one, and her mandate was just that of looking just at the negative impact of what she called unilateral sanctions. And we pointed out that you cannot delink, you cannot decouple the issue of Zimbabwe's isolation with the structural problems that Zimbabwe are facing. These structural problems include the issue of governance, the issue of legitimacy in stolen elections, the issue of the rule of law, the issue of corruption, for Christ's sake. So that is the same equation. You cannot decouple and delink. So she spent a lot of time digging her head in the sand like an ostrich, insisting that she had no mandate to look at those issues, that there were other special rapporteurs for those areas. But it's impossible. We also had arguments on definitions. So at the end of the day, we found a very acrimonious, a very belligerent rapporteur, inconsistent with the UN that we know, inconsistent with the international diplomacy. So we are disappointed, and as I have said, we have written to the UN to ask about such conduct, because in our view, the conduct is inconsistent with the implied or express conduct expected of a senior diplomat of a huge organization and an important organization such as the UN. We are also concerned about a question she couldn't answer at a press briefing yesterday, which is the critical question of who funded her trip to Zimbabwe. As all of you know, rapporteurs, special rapporteurs, are not employed by the UN. So when they carry out their mandate, someone has to fund. In the interest of transparency and openness, we ask the Zimbabwean government to disclose whether in fact they actually funded you. All of you are journalists, and you know that we have a Freedom of Information Act that is anchored on Section 62 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. And Section 62 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe makes it very clear that the state is obliged to provide information that is in the public interest. It is in the public interest for Zimbabweans to know who funded Miss Alena Douhan's two-week joint in Zimbabwe between the 17th of October 2021 to the 28th of October 2021. For all we know, she might be sampling our best tourist resort, Victoria Falls, right now at taxpayers' expense. We, the taxpayers of Zimbabwe, armed with our constitution, demand the right to know who funded this trip. One of the things that concerns us is that whilst the Zimbabwean government, and we don't know, may not necessarily have funded this trip, we know of the existence of cartels and other dubious and nebulous characters that are making huge rents in Zimbabwe, who may in fact have funded it. And I want to make reference to Trafigura. Trafigura, as you know, is a huge Russian conglomerate that is based in Switzerland, capitalized with a market capitalization of US $98 billion. It controls our pipeline together with a local partner. The Zimbabwe fuel industry is a US $2 billion industry. Did Trafigura or any other party actually fund Ms. Douhan's trip? Which is why in our letter to the UN, we've asked her to ask her this question and also to verify with her own personal accounts the source of her funding and the source of deposits and credits in her account in the last few weeks. So we are not making any allegation against anyone, against her, against Trafigura. We are simply asking for full disclosure of who funded her, because our constitution gives us the right to information which is protected and codified in Section 62 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. And you members of the media, you have got a right to information, the right to the media, codified and protected by Section 61 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. I now move to the merits, ladies and gentlemen. I want to underscore one thing and I'm glad our friends at the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation are here. The MDC Alliance, led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa, stands for the end to the isolation of Zimbabwe. And this is not a new thing. It is stated clearly and unambiguously in our Smart Blueprint Doctrine document that was published in June of 2018. So I want to restate again, out of the avoidance of doubt. In Latin we say ex abundante cautela. The MDC Alliance, led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa, stands for the end to the isolation of Zimbabwe and the total integration of Zimbabwe into the community of nations. But however, this discussion must be linked inextricably, umbilical, to the address of the Zimbabwean crisis in its totality. So it cannot be a delinked and decoupled debate. The question of Zimbabwe's isolation must be connected to discussions around the totality of the Zimbabwean crisis, focusing in particular on the following issues. Number one, the issue of governance, accountability, the issue of transparency, the issue of legitimacy, and the right of Zimbabweans to hold free and fair election, the issue of violence and the security of the person. Only last week our president was attacked in Masvingo and his vehicle was damaged. Only last week there was an assassination attempt on our president in Mutare, a few kilometers from Mutare in the Zimunya communal lands. These discussions should be on the table. There must be discussions on the constitution, which in 2 years the government has mutilated through constitutional amendment number 1 and number 2. There must be discussion on harmonizing our country's laws to this constitution. I made reference to the ZBC a few minutes ago. Is it not an atrocity that 41 years after independence we still have in this country one broadcasting house, which I notice continuously wins awards for the best broadcast of the year at our Zimbabwe International Trade Fair annual? Is it that not ironic? The issue of corruption, freedom of the person, freedom of movement. So in this regard, as Professor Walshman Mube stated 2 days ago in this very garden, we support the newfound attitude and expression by the SADC, by SADC and the African Union of making a connection between the ending Zimbabwe's isolation and addressing the key fundamental challenges that are affecting Zimbabwe, which are the issue of contested elections, which is the issue of contested leadership, which is the issue of lack of leadership, vacuous leadership, ideologically bankrupt leadership, the issue of corruption and extractiveness, the issue of lack of accountability and impunity, the issue of abuse of law and the absence of constitutionalism in this country. These issues are a total package and they cannot be delinked. So that is our position. Don't second guess us on this clear and unambiguous position. With that remark, I now want to go to our reservations with Ms. Douhan's statement, both the interim statement which she released nicodemously behind our back in the process of consulting with her on Wednesday, the 27th of October 2021, and the final 12-page statement which she released yesterday afternoon, the 28th of October 2021. The first thing we find the report full of contradictions and full of downright distortions and also full of technical technical distortions. What we don't know is that whether she's just plain illiterate or she is just plain dishonest. But given the impressive array of her academic qualifications, we would like to think that it's deliberate or boostification and deliberate dishonest. And I'll try to demonstrate here those distortions, or boostifications, and mendacity in a report. So the first challenge we have is the definition of measures. She's quick to define the measures that have been taken against Zimbabwe as unilateral. Now, the first challenge with that is that that is simply not true. So I want to begin with the measures that were taken by the European Union in 2001. So what happened was that we had a general election on the 11th of March 2001, as all of you know, and it was contested between the late and great President Morgan Tsvangirai and, of course, President Robert Mugabe, who's lying in a grave 147 kilometers from where I'm standing here in rural Zimba. Before the eve of this election, Zimbabwe expelled European Union observers that were led by Swedish international Pierre Schori. And Pierre Schori was a very senior diplomat in Brussels. He had been one of their commissioners. Those of you who know the infrastructure in Brussels, the infrastructure at the European Union and at the European Commission. Now, you don't expel observers. The community of nations will react to you. And this is one of the things about measures taken against Zimbabwe. They are own goals. They are authored and mothered by Zimbabwe's own omissions and commissions, and by Zimbabwe's own refusal to play according to the standards of international law and the international community. When Pierre Schori and his team were expelled, the European Union immediately started consultations in terms of the Cotonou Agreement. The Cotonou Agreement is the agreement between the European Union, between Brussels and members of the ACP. The ACP stands for African, Caribbean, Pacific countries. So they have a relationship with Brussels, and that relationship is called the Cotonou Agreement, which is a successor to the Lomé Agreement. So Article 6 and Article 96 of the Cotonou Agreement says if a member state fails to uphold certain standards in terms of that agreement, certain punitive measures will be taken. It is as a result of the Article 6 and Article 96 consultations in terms of the Cotonou Agreement that targeted sanctions were placed on some individuals in Zimbabwe. And that is not unilateral. That was not unilateral. And Ms. Douhan can't define unilateral as any action taken outside the UN, because that is wrong. When SADC meets and decides to take action against the military in Lesotho, or the military in Madagascar, or when it decides to send peacekeepers in Swaziland or Eswatini, it doesn't need the approval or consent of the UN or the UN Security Council. When the West African Union decides to send troops to look for Charles Taylor in Liberia or in Sierra Leone, it doesn't need approval from the United Nations. In other words, there are other multilateral organs of international law, the European Union being one of them, the African Union being one of them, SADC being one of them, which operates on the basis of consent of the member states to create norms and standards which, if one of the member states breaches, the other member states act. That's basic elementary international law. How she can twist this eludes our wisdom. The second complaint on substance is one thing that I've already alluded to, which is a decoupling of cause and effect, which is a delinking the agency of the Zimbabwean government, the responsibility of the Zimbabwean government over its actions which have resulted in the effects and in certain results which have been detrimental to the Zimbabwean people. So you can't, for instance, talk of economic malaise in Zimbabwe without talking of the pervasive impact of corruption in Zimbabwe. So when 2.7 billion US dollars is stolen in 2017 through Treasury, it would be wrong to de-link that with the suffering of our people. When 3.5 billion US dollars is lost directly through Treasury in 2018, you can't de-link that, as she does in a report, with the suffering of our people. When $6.9 billion, according to the Audit General report of 2019, is stolen from Treasury, you can't de-link that from the suffering of our people. We have got over $100 million per month is being lost in illicit gold exports alone, which will be $1 billion by the end of the year. And you can't de-link the issue of corruption, massive corruption, with the Zimbabwean crisis. So there is cause and effect, and so we object to a report that pretends that the Zimbabwean government is clean, that the Zimbabwean government has no agency, that then decouples and delinks the Zimbabwean crisis from the active responsibility of the actors that are controlling the Zimbabwean government. Thirdly, we have a problem in conflating targeted measures which exist and no one disputes them with the measures and the penalties imposed against Zimbabwean companies within different specific agreements. Since 9/11, the world is operating under a strict regime of international financial compliance. That strict international financial compliance is regulated by two key institutions. Number one is the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, based in New York. The function of the Financial Action Task Force is to follow money, to follow global money, and to ensure that global money does not finance terrorism, global terrorism, does not finance and is not a subject of money laundering, does not finance illicit financial flows, in particular child trafficking, in particular arms dealing, in particular drugs. So OFAC follows the money to see that there's not been breaches of its rules and regulations. And as a result of penalties taken and imposed by OFAC, you have seen big global banks such as Barclays Bank, such as HSBC, such as ABN AMRO, such as Standard Chartered Bank, UK, being fined billions of dollars. It is because you have failed to be transparent, or you have aided and abetted an identified designated person, either an arms dealer or a member of Al Qaeda, and so forth. So you can't do that. But the bank, the report conflates that. So she mentions 3 banks that have been fined in Zimbabwe. It has nothing to do with measures against and targeted measures. It has everything to do with the compliance with FATF. Then you have got OFAC. OFAC traces assets. OFAC traces assets across the globe. Because the tendency is that dictators and take Mobutu Sese Seko, take Sani Abacha, take people like Ayadema. These dictators have a tendency of buying property in different parts of the world. And one of the key things that OFAC does is to trace that property. So when you are the president of a poor little country like Zimbabwe, you certainly have assets in Dubai, assets in Singapore, assets in Hong Kong, assets in Shanghai. OFAC will pick that up. And when measures are taken in terms of OFAC or FATF, it has nothing to do with political questions. But the report seems to conflate that. We find that dishonest, we find that unacceptable. Then we have figures that are thrown around in that report. And there are 2 figures she throws around without substance. And we've got great problems. So she says in her report that were it not for these measures, Zimbabwe would have received $100 billion in the form of overseas development assistance, in the form of grants and so forth. But that is impossible. Where does this $100 billion come from? Kenya has not received that $100 billion. Malawi has not received that $100 billion. Ghana has not received that $100 billion. South Africa has not received that $100 billion. And there are no measures against this country. So we have a problem with the wild figures that are just thrown around. She also says that Zimbabwe's infrastructure deficit as a result of this measure is $34 billion. But, ladies and gentlemen, this economy has been terribly mismanaged. So terribly mismanaged that we can't attend to the infrastructural deficit of our country as Zimbabweans. We've got a 100-kilometer stretch of road across the length of Zimbabwe. Under Ian Smith, 30% of that kilometer stretch of road was tarred. Under the present government, less than 10% is tarred. That has nothing to do with Washington or Brussels or London. It is because we have not bothered to invest in infrastructure. As I'm talking to you right now, we have become the blackout capital of sub-Saharan Africa. There's no electricity. Why? Because the machines and the generators we are using at Wange 1 to 6 should have been decommissioned in 1984. So we're using machines that belong to a museum, and you can't blame that on measures. Then another thing which she is totally wrong and false, and I'm concluding now. It is our relationship with the international financial institutions, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and the IMF. So she says because of sanctions, Zimbabwe has failed to access money from the World Bank, money from the IMF, and money from the African Development Bank. But that is not true. The reason why we have failed to access resources from these institutions is because we have arrears. Zimbabwe defaulted on its repayment obligations way back in 1999. Way back in 1999. So if you go and borrow from OK Bazaars, or from Foschini or Edgar's, and you default on your loan, you can't say it's sanctions when Edgar's refuses to give you another suit or another dress. You have defaulted. Zimbabwe has got a serious debt overhead. She puts the figure at $8 billion in her report. The correct figure is $12 billion, broken down as follows: $2 billion that we owe to the World Bank, $5.4 billion that we owe to what are called the Paris Club of Lenders, which is basically European institutions and European companies. $600 million that we owe to the African Development Bank. The remainder, a lot of money is owed, as you know, to the African Import and Export Bank. The remainder, as you know, a lot of money, and no one knows the figure, is also owed to the Republic of China. Some money is also owed to, small amounts are owed to governments such as India and other African states. So we have got, not only do we have debt, we have arrears. And arrears arise when you fail to service your debt. And when you fail to service your debt and you accumulate arrears, the lenders will not lend you money. That is why it is so important for Zimbabwe to have a debt strategy. That is why during my time I had what we called the Zimbabwe Accelerated Arrears Debt and Development Strategy, EZADS. That is why even Minister Chinamasa in 2015, if you recall, had what he called the Lima process. The Lima process was an attempt to deal with Zimbabwe's debt crisis. Unfortunately, Mr. Mtuli has nothing, but at least Chinamasa had the decency of excavating what he called the Lima crisis. So when Zimbabwe fails to access loans from the African Development Bank, the IMF, the World Bank, it is because of our arrears. And resolving, and I keep on saying this, resolving our debt crisis is key because it is a development issue. The original name of the World Bank is the Bank of Reconstruction. So if you want cheap money, free grants, very cheap money, you access it through the World Bank. But you can't access it when you've got arrears. You can't access it when you've got arrears. Since 1999, Zimbabwe has defaulted. Finally, before I go to my conclusion, she also says Zimbabwe's risk is very high. So she says we are lending money above 7%. Zimbabwe's risk profile is high, of course. But why is it high? It is high because we don't respect agreements. There is no property rights in this country. So I don't even want to go to the absence of title deeds given to farmers. Without title deeds, there's no respect to title. I want to go to the mismanagement of our foreign currency. Who will invest in a country where you bring in US dollars, but one morning, the 19th of February, you wake up and be told that your money is now RTGS dollars, equal 1-for-1, geje, with a bond note. Which investor, if you are a financial advisor, you'll be fired. And that is what contributes to our high risk profile. We don't respect property rights. We don't respect agreements. As a lawyer, I've spent the past 2 years representing old depositors who put their money in the old mutual, in cabs. And one morning they woke up their money, they had saved pensions, and they were told it's now Zimbabwean dollars. In 2008, our pensioners lost 5.68 billion US dollars worth of pensions. We invest money in an economy like this. After 2009, those same pensioners worked and savings in US dollars, only to wake up one morning on the 22nd of February 2019 through Statutory Instrument 33 of 2019 to be told that your money is now Zimbabwean dollars. That is why Zimbabwe's risk profile is so high. So again, we take great exception to the lies, if you like, the misrepresentation, deliberate misrepresentation. In conclusion, I want to say, and by the way, she has to contrive this submission because she has a problem with Zimbabwe's balance of payment position. Zimbabwe is trading with every country. Zimbabwe is trading with every country. Zimbabwe has got a healthy trade position. And I'll just give you quick figures. Exports, Zimbabwe's exports, 2019, 4.6 billion. 2020, 4.9 billion. 2021, 5.1 billion. Zimbabwe's imports, 2019, 4.4 billion. 2020, 4.7 billion. 2021, 5.2 billion. But this is the interesting figure. This is our surplus now, trade surplus. 2019, 1.3 billion. 2020, 1.7 billion. 2021, 1.7 billion. So in other words, we actually have a healthy trading account. In economics, it's called a current account. Our current account is actually very healthy, meaning that we are trading with everyone. So in the context of that, it's very difficult to sell the myth and lie of measures affecting Zimbabwe. It's very high. And the figure I was referring to, I actually extracted it from Minister Mthuli Ngube's mid-term review statement provided in July of 2020. In conclusion, I want to state that we need, as Zimbabweans, to be honest with ourselves and to accept that we need broad, genuine dialogue to resolve the Zimbabwean crisis. And if we resolve the Zimbabwean crisis amongst ourselves, we answer immediately whatever measures that are existing around our country. We need stability, and we need oneness and the capacity to work together. In the brief period that we worked together in 2009 and 2013, we did so well. When those measures were in fact inexistent, look at the figures of the government of national unity. Look at the growth figures. So they became irrelevant because we were together. So we call, as Professor Walshman did 2 days ago, we call for genuine dialogue guaranteed by SADC, guaranteed by the international community. We call for reforms, constitutional reforms, electoral reforms, as we argued in our 2 documents, Reload and the Prize. We call for a sustainable Zimbabwe, led by a leader chosen and loved by the people, and by the way, his advocate, Nelson Jones. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
The things that the rapporteur said yesterday at the press conference was that corruption is being driven because of the sanctions. She said that there's a link between the sanctions and the corruption in Olympics. What's your view as the MDC sanctions being linked to corruption?
Thank you for that question. I'll take it.
Patrick Secure, SABC. I've got 2 questions. The first one is actually a point of clarity. You did say that the MDC Alliance Position is for the ending of isolation of Zimbabwe. Then you also said you recognize SADC as the institution. What is your position regarding the 25th of October, the SADC Day, calling for the instruction? That's the clarity that I require of you.
I'll begin with your final question. As I said, we've written a complaint to the UN. So we don't believe that she is a fair interlocutor. We don't believe that she is an impartial interlocutor. We believe she's biased. We believe she's prepaid. And we believe she's subjective. The way she treated us, for instance, was just shocking. It lacked decency. It lacked decorum. It lacked respect. And we've also looked at the previous reports in Syria, in Venezuela, and in other cases. We cannot but be persuaded that she's just a spokesperson of rogue regimes and rogue elements. So we don't believe that her reports, whether final or otherwise, will be an objective representation of the Zimbabwean crisis and what needs to be done. 25 October is ZANU-PF Day. It has nothing to do with us. It's ZANU-PF Day. We have nothing to do with it. But as I said, we want full dialogue. We want full dialogue to focus on all these issues. And yes, we've argued for the issue of isolation to be addressed along the lines that I have dealt with before. We find it absurd. We find it absurd that the cause of stealing can anything be external. I mean, we find it absurd. you go to the Ministry of Health and you are granted an $80 million contract, which is signed by the Minister of Health in his ugly handwriting. You steal $80 million. The Auditor General of Zimbabwe says $89 million of funds that were given for COVID were stolen. How does Brussels or London or Washington DC come into play? You're just a thief. A big thief. So the suggestion that you steal because there's London or Brussels is so grossly unreasonable, such that no rational person properly applying her mind would have made such a statement. Thank you.